Hello and welcome to the Stay Free Forever podcast, episode 17. My name is Clifford Fuel, host of the podcast that aims to help you adapt and thrive. Earlier this year, I was listening to a relatively new podcast called The Gospel of Direct Experience, featuring my beloved son-in-law, the Reverend Jeffrey Mansfield, husband of my youngest daughter, Bonnie Mohan, and his longtime friend and fellow clergyman, Michael Ellick. Jeff's and Michael's February show was entitled Star Wars, Hidden Histories, and the Stories That Shape Us with AJ Musewe. This was a riveting discussion of the spiritual themes to be found not only in Star Wars and its many sequels and prequels, but also in the Harry Potter stories and other science fiction and fantasy tales. What historian and educator AJ Musewe of Seattle brought to the discussion, for starters, was profound insight and infectious laughter. Her knowledge and interpretations of these hugely popular movies is fascinating, as is her research into the quote-unquote hidden histories of the civil rights movement in the United States. Through her research, AJ tells the stories of those crusaders who are lesser known but equally courageous and impactful. AJ's impact on me was such that I immediately reached out and invited her to be a guest on the Stay Free Forever podcast, and lucky for all of us, she accepted. Although she is not a justice-involved individual, AJ is passionate about justice. I believe that her mission to right wrongs, empower people, and improve the world will resonate with my listeners, people who need and deserve inspiration, direction, purpose, and respect. AJ is also the first guest on the podcast known to have 4 middle names.
Audrey Akinyi June Trufena Monye Musewe.
Was born in Nairobi, Kenya in 1988. Her mother is a scholar and the founder and director of a school, clinic, and community center serving her ancestral village and a large portion of Western Kenya. Her father is an agricultural consultant with the Gates Foundation. Through her organization, the With Reverence Co-op, AJ lectures and leads and gets students of all ages fired up about the history of Black people in the United States so that the civil rights movement remains as active and relevant today as it has been for centuries. When asked about a memorable school she attended, AJ singled out Garfield High School in Seattle, often described as 2 schools in one for its history in the heart of the Black community and its struggle to serve all equally since the neighborhood has gentrified. AJ says, quote unquote, it was a crazy experience with fights, cops, and more. Let's get to that more, shall we? Welcome to the Stay Free Forever podcast, AJ Musewe.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
And I'm really happy to have you here. Why did you say your name? Why didn't I say it?
Well, my family is from Kenya, and in our tradition, the Luo tradition, your child is typically given a name based on the time of day they were born, which is Akinyi. So that would tell somebody I was born in the early morning when it's sunny. And then usually you're given a name based off of somebody who inspired your parents or somebody who had a profound impact on your parents. And so the Trufena Monye in my name is after my great grandmother. And I believe I'm the only cousin that has both of the names. My mother loved her grandmother. And so basically she said, I don't care if I'm having a girl or a boy. This baby's going to get that names. June, I'm not really sure. It depends on the person you ask in my family, to be honest. We typically, the kind of ironic thing about being named after an elder who is held in high regard is you can't really use their name. So my mom doesn't even really call me Trufena or Monye. She would probably say Twena because every name has a nickname to it. So my mom, if she wanted to refer to me as her grandmother, she would also say Dana, which is my grandmother in Luo. If she ever says True Pneumonia, I know I'm in trouble. So luckily, she doesn't typically call me that. But yes, it is disrespectful in a way for us to use the name of our elders, regardless of who it is. So just out of respect for my great grandmother and my mother and my grandma, who is my grandmother's mother, I typically tend to be the one to say it.
Fair enough, and I appreciate the coaching on that.
Of course.
Yeah. So what do you, if anything, do you remember about your brief early life in Kenya?
Well, I get to go back fairly often, but what I do remember is, oh, I was a bougie kid. I was a city kid through and through. My mom worked some incredible jobs. One of the last jobs that she worked before we came to the States was at Total. My mom speaks 7 languages. Like, I don't know. It kind of was like if Sex in the City, if those 4 ladies had one of them had a child, that's pretty much what my life what my life was like. I lived a very comfortable life. My mom owned a 3-story house and a car by the time I was 5. She had multiple businesses. So I would say I lived a very cushy, privileged life, comparatively even to my cousins.
Sure. And then you moved to the States when you were 4?
7.
7. Okay, so
Yeah,
you had a
yeah.
good 7 years in Kenya, and then maybe a degree of culture shock, perhaps?
Absolutely. I'm pretty sure the first thing I wanted to do was go to McDonald's because that's what we saw. But then, yeah, the kind of smart aleck in me started to pop out. I had a stepbrother, and we got to the States around October, actually, around my mom's birthday, if I remember correctly. And coming up was Christmas. And for us in Kenya, Christmas was just Jesus's birthday. You know, you have a cake, you sing, and then that's kind of the end of it. The family has dinner. But when I got to the States, you know, the kids in my school were like, "Oh my God, Santa's coming." And I was like, "Who is Santa? And why is he going to everybody's house?" So finally I got home and I asked my stepbrother and I was like, "Hey, who's this Santa guy? Like everybody's talking about him." And he tried to explain it. He's like, "Yeah, there's this guy, he comes, he gives you presents, he leaves them under a tree." My first question is, why is there a tree in the house? Like what is going on in America? Like what is happening? And why is some strange man coming in and leaving presents? Like why is nobody concerned about this? Then, of course, I started asking questions, and I said, "So, how does he get into the apartment if there's no chimney? Like, this is weird, you guys. Like, America's a little odd." Outside of that, it was pretty easy to adjust because a lot of the Western kind of privileged customs and opportunities were the same ones that I had in Kenya. Because again, I did not grow up in the village; I was a city girl, so it was pretty easy to adjust. And I lost my accent fairly early. Um, I would say school is probably the hardest adjustment because I spoke English as my third language. They automatically put me in ESL. And within a week, they realized I was pretty much smarter than every other kid in the class. And so they took me out. But those kind of systemic things were the hardest things for my mom to understand. But those were the ones that I grew up being able to kind of navigate better. And so I had the typical immigrant experience of having to help my mom navigate some of those, regardless of how brilliant she is. The American system is quite confusing for no reason.
Yeah, yeah, or for certainly reasons hard to understand. I imagine, especially coming in from an African nation.
Yeah, and I also think Kenya is probably one of the more westernized nations, I would say. I think if I was to speak for the Luo tribe, my tribe, we definitely jumped into the Western affinity feet first, cannonballed into the deep end. We still have a lot of traditions and customs and culture, but they're not as tangible and not as visible. It's kind of just in the ways that you interact with your elders and such. But yeah, I'm not really surprised that Kenya is the way it is, but we are a spicy group. I will say that out of all of the countries in Africa, I'm very, very proud to be from Kenya for sure.
Wonderful. The acculturation process for you included movies, TV shows. I was really impressed on the podcast, your deep knowledge and able to articulate why you followed Star Wars and Harry Potter so well. I don't want to repeat the or take steal the thunder from folks who are going to go listen to that episode, but talk a little bit about that, please.
Sure. I have been blessed with legacy, is the easiest way I can kind of say it. My family is very influential in our village because of, I would say, probably my great great grandfather on my grandpa's side and my great great grandmother on my grandma's side. My great great grandfather was introduced to the missionaries around 12, and he jumped into it because he understood that that was going to be the opportunity, the best opportunity he was going to get kind of out of the poverty that he was experiencing. And we don't use poverty in the same way. It's not necessarily poverty of like money specifically, but like poverty of resources, right? You don't know what you don't know. And so once you're exposed to those things, then your world gets a little bigger. And because of education, my great grandfather decided that all of the children in his family would be educated regardless of gender. So as my grandfather was coming up, that was just what he knew. My mother being born the firstborn of 10, as a woman, she was supposed to stay home and take care of the rest of the kids. And then the other kids would get to go to school. And my great grandfather was like, absolutely not. Like, she has to go to school. So the legacy of education is kind of the biggest thing about Luos that we loud over everybody. I have a best friend who went to go get her hair braided, and the lady who was braiding her hair is a Kikuyu woman who's the biggest tribe in Kenya, and kind of our rivals. I would say like a Duke, North Carolina type of thing. And they were talking, and my best friend was like, "Oh yeah, my best friend is from Kenya." And the lady immediately asked her, like, "Oh, what tribe?" And my friend said, "She's Luo." She goes, "Oh, I bet you she has a college degree and she likes to read." And my friend was like, "Actually, she does." Like that is exactly who she is. So as I'm growing up and understanding who my family is, who my mother is, and kind of what our lineage is about, I started to understand what responsibility I have in either continuing that legacy, growing that legacy, or possibly even destroying that legacy. So Harry Potter and Star Wars for me were just like lessons, right? Lessons that I could take from. So Star Wars teaches me that grief is such a tangible thing that it can literally shift the way that you see the world. I can remember at 10, my mom always telling me, like, one day mom is not going to be around. I want you to grieve, but not fall apart, because grieving is just a part of life. Our family has been hit really hard with HIV AIDS, so we understand the cycle of life and death in a very intimate way. And then Harry Potter teaches me, like, if you have a legacy and you are true to your convictions and you are working for the greater good rather than ego, you can accomplish really, really great things. So for me, Star Wars and Harry are kind of a tale of what happens when an individual, a kid who is given this kind of bigger than life mission, what happens when you go either one way or the other. And I have a bigger than life mission. I've pretty much been raising myself since I was 15 because my mom has to travel back and forth to go back home to the village. So I understood by the time I was in my early 20s, maybe even late teens, that I have to have myself together in order for my mom to be able to do the things that she needs to do because it's bigger than me. And then what is my version of that is pretty much what Harry Potter and Star Wars has been for me.
Wow, great answer. You just returned from a visit to Alabama in the South, um, talking with someone who has his own Harry Potter-esque qualities. Can you talk about that a little bit, please?
Absolutely. One of my favorite people to talk about ever. So I was in Alabama, in Fairhope specifically, because I have a very, very close friend that I met in 2017 on my first trip to the American South. His name is Bob Zellner, and he was the first white field secretary for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. Bob's family was in the Klan. His father was a Klansman. His grandfather was a Klansman. His cousins, uncles, aunts. He was raised in that environment until his father kind of denounced the Klan. And so at when he was in college, his senior year, I believe, he decided that he was going to do a sociology paper on this quote unquote race problem. But his professors were like, "Yeah, but you can't talk to any black people." And Bob was like, "It's kind of impossible for me to talk about the race issue if I don't talk to any black people." So him and four of his friends snuck into a mass meeting at the First Avenue Baptist Church, and he ran into Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King looked at him and said, "Sir, the police know you're here. They have surrounded the building. What do you want to do?" And Bob was like, "I just want to write a paper." And Martin was like, "Oh, okay." So MLK decided that he was going to help him out, and he said, "I'm going to go to the front, pull all of the attention and media and police to the front. You guys go down in the basement and sneak out the back." And so Bob and his friends was like, "Great." And as they were getting ready to run out, Bob was the last one out. And it was actually Mrs. Rosa Parks and Reverend Ralph Abernathy, who was MLK's best friend, that had taken them downstairs. And right before Bob walks out the door, he tells the story all the time. He points to this left elbow and he'll go, "Miss Rosa Parks touched me right here." And he looked at her and she said, you know, "It's your turn to do something." Like when you see something that is not fair, when you see injustice, you have a duty to do something. And Bob was like, "Yeah, sure, okay," and ran out the door. Luckily, they made it back to school, even though they were foolish goats and parked their cars right in front of the church. So four of the students were suspended, but Bob was like, "I'm not leaving school." He completed school and somehow he found himself in Atlanta, and he was interviewed by Jim Foreman, who was the executive director of SNCC at the time. And by 1960, 61, Bob was the first white Southerner to be part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So fast forward, he's lived a long life. It's been heavy, it's been difficult, and he's reaching the end of his life. And after 2017, when we met, we just clicked and we became thick as thieves. We're extremely mischievous when we're together. We laugh at all the like most ridiculous dad jokes. And it's been an honor being able to take care of him in the best way I know how. So he asked if I would be able to come down and help him sort through some of his documents that have been in storage for decades. And my goodness, the things that I found, like it was incredible. I found posters from the Jim Crow era from 1931 that, restricted folks by race. I found the first one of the registration papers that had all of the names of the folks that were given together before SNCC was created at Shaw University, which is the alma mater of Mrs. Ella Baker. I mean, I found first edition of Toni Morrison books. It was incredible, like pictures of the Klan. I found his father's birth announcement from 1912. And so being able to like offer physical time to Bob is probably one of the greatest gifts I can give him. And then I just get to hear stories. I get to sit at the foot of an elder who has lived so much life and glean lessons. And that's why I really like, I have such a soft spot for my elders. In our tribe, we say when you lose an elder, you lose a library. And so I tend to spend a lot of time, just kind of talking to Bob, asking him questions like, yes, SNCC is awesome, but what did you guys do when you guys disagreed? How do you problem solve? And after he left SNCC, he started an organization called GROW, Grassroots Organizing Work, where his job was to try and bring together former Klans members, Black union laborers, and the everyday person into some sort of community. And that's the part that I find most fascinating is how do you work towards building a community that takes care of all, but also still acknowledges the individual struggles that a person goes through. So yeah, it's been kind of the adventure of my life, getting to know Bob and hearing the stories about the folks we read in history books. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I remember playing poker with Chuck McDew, or when I was at Parchment Prison with Chuck. We had to share this book, and he had the first half of the book, and I had the second half, and all of that." So I think there are a lot of lessons that our elders can offer us, but I don't think we have fully figured out how to bridge the generational gap for our elders to listen to us and for us to also acknowledge the lessons and the ways that the elders have paved a path for us. So that's kind of what I like to noodle on when I'm not noodling on whatever else.
Sure, sure. And just as a brief aside, your retelling of that Rosa Parks encounter at the back basement door of the church is pretty darn faithful to the movie Son of the South, which is based on Bob's book. And I don't know about the rest of the movie. I assume it's pretty faithful. I enjoyed it the first time I saw it, but it's a movie.
Oh yeah, yeah. The young black lady who is kind of with Bob throughout the movie is a combination of a lot of really amazing women that Bob has worked with. But yeah, it was pretty true. If you do watch the movie again, right at the beginning when the Bob character is getting ready to be hung, the person who goes, "Hang him," that's Bob Zellner.
Good to know.
Yeah, so if you watch it again, that's the Bob literally is yelling out, "Hang him,"
A
because
little
of course he is.
Hitchcockian cameo.
Exactly, exactly.
Wow. Well, a lot of people, when they drop names that everyone recognizes. AJ Musewe tends to drop names that are frankly head scratchers. And this is one of the things I most wanted to talk to you about. Some of the people who are lesser known who have paved the way for all of us. Who comes to mind?
Ooh, I have my big three. Similarly to anybody who watches sports, you have your big three. For me, if I'm talking sports, it's, Diana Taurasi, Sue Bird, Maya Moore, depending on the day. But as far as civil rights activists, I also have my big three. First one is probably Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, then Robert Smalls, and then Bob, to be honest.
Okay.
I would say Robert Smalls, and the funny thing is I have a connection to all three. Obviously, I'm really good friends with Bob. It is a I don't even unimaginable honor when he introduces me to people as his daughter. Like what greater gift. And he met Mrs. Hamer. He worked with Mrs. Hamer. Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer was born in 1917 in Mississippi. She was the 12th child of her family, if I'm not mistaken. And she grew up with a sixth grade education, was a sharecropper. And I know sometimes folks don't always know what sharecropping is, but after the end of the Civil War, we had the Reconstruction period, depending on the historian you talk to, between 1865 and 1877, when Rutherford B. Hayes becomes president, and the Southern troops are pulled out of the Union, the federal troops are pulled out of the South. So after that, during that time, Robert Smalls essentially stole a Confederate steamship and sailed it into Union waters, taking along 17 people, including his wife and children. After that, he became a captain in the Union Army. Even though they didn't call him a captain, they called him a wheelman. And for the rest of the Civil War, he literally just like navigated around the waters that he had been working in around Charleston. After the end of the Civil War, he becomes a congressman. He builds a school. He starts a newspaper, and then he goes back and he purchases the house that he and his mom were enslaved in, which is still in the Smalls family today. Obviously taken care of by the National Park Service. And I had done a podcast previously where I was gushing about Robert Smalls, and I just kept calling him my main man, Rob. And somebody sent it to Robert Smalls' great great grandson. And so he had come on a show and he did an interview with me, but I could not talk because I just kept staring at him. And I was like, oh my God, like Robert Smalls is your great great grandfather. Like I was freaking out. And so I encourage people to kind of learn those lesser known names as much as possible. Like I introduce them to them, and then hopefully the curiosity takes them further. When it comes to Mrs. Hamer, she's like Qui-Gon Jinn. For those who are Star Wars fans, like she is Michael Jordan. She is Magic Johnson. She is one of the most incredible people that we do not give enough credit for. When she was 44 years old, she learned that she had the constitutional right to cast her ballot because members of SNCC had come to do a mass meeting. And so she went home, she told her husband, Pap, and she was like, hey, I'm going to go register to vote. And Pap was like, okay, do you? And of course, she was automatically kicked out of her land. She lost her job and they started shooting at her wherever she would go to stay because she had the audacity to go register to vote. Kind of the thing that most people know about Mrs. Hamer is in 1963, she was coming back from a voter rights training and her bus was stopped in Winona, Mississippi, where then she was arrested and beaten within an inch of her life. As she's recovering from that, she goes on to help found the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party to challenge the white delegates of Mississippi to be the rightful representation of the state. Then in 1964, she goes to the Democratic National Convention in Atlantic City, where she gives a testimony in front of the Credentials Committee that is 8 minutes of the most powerful story you could ever hear, where she talks about her beating in Winona. And at the end of it, she goes all on the account of us wanting to be first class citizens and vote. Like, is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where I have to sleep with my telephone off the hook because I want to be a first class citizen? I mean, even now, I thinking about it, I get chills.
Yeah.
I don't know how you don't know who Mrs. Hamer is. Like, I don't know why we weren't taught about her, but even what we know about Ella Baker or Septima Clark or Dorothy Cotton, the way we learn about the Montgomery bus boycott, if you were to type that into Google right now, it would pull up Martin Luther King, but it's not going to pull up the Women's Political Council who had been lobbying for desegregated buses since 53, right? And so I usually like to take the stories that we do know and then figure out like what am I missing about this story? Like what caused this story to be told in this way and who was left out? And because I am the firstborn of a firstborn, because I have so many strong Black women around me who have basically told me that there is no ceiling for me. It just is a matter of what my brain wants to do, where my mind takes me. I want to honor the Black women, the Black American women specifically, who have made it possible for me to live the full life that I have, that have made it possible for my mom to be a Truman Scholar and to build an organization and to be on a first name basis with, former President Jimmy Carter and Bill Gates Sr. Because funny enough, my mom also worked at the Gates Foundation, which I think is quite hilarious. So these women, like the Mrs. Hamers, the Joanne Robinson of the Women's Political Council, Georgia Gilmore, who created the Club from Nowhere, which was a group of women that would cook food and sell them to maintain and sustain the Montgomery bus boycott. Those are the people I want to know about. Because if you think about, let's say, for example, the March on Washington in 63, right? You have 250,000 people there to listen to folks talk. Who are those 250,000 people, right? I'm sure some of them are giving up jobs, opportunities, whatever, to be there to show solidarity to the people who are fighting on the front lines of the movement. And so for me, ego and kind of shine was never the thing that attracted me to a story. It was always the folks who wanted to sit in the background, with their legs crossed, taking notes and kind of observing. And that's pretty much how I am in life for the most part, unless unless I am watching sports, then I'm a little rowdy. But outside of that, I really enjoy learning and taking leisurely strolls through history. It's more about the journey than necessarily the destination for me. So yeah, when I think of lesser known people, those first three come to mind, and then God, do I have stories for days after that.
Sure. One of the things about your character that I've noticed and that impresses me, and I think is part of your success and will be part of your future success even more, is the gentle way you go about educating. I don't get a lot of you're lording it over people with your knowledge, and you should know this. Any ninny should know this. It's a very different approach.
I appreciate that. It's not necessarily something that I trained myself to do. I have definitely tried to be somebody else, and I cannot be anything other than myself. So I just figured, let me just embrace it. For me, education was always fun. I like learning. It's like a big adventure, you know. I think of myself as a Jedi Knight, you know, or a Padawan even to education. There's so much that I don't know, and it's not about how much you know, but how you use it, right? You catch more flies with honey than vinegar type of thing. Two, the more I understand about history and the more I understand about the American education system, which I went through, I know that there's certain things that we're not being taught. And it's not just like the Black community or the Latinx community or the Asian community that's not being taught. It's all of us. So if I know that we're all not being taught history, you know, with an unbiased way, then I can't be mad at you for what you don't know. Now that you are interested in learning, why would I beat you over the head, you know, about what you don't know? So whenever I do my sessions, I have three ground rules, and the first one is always no knowledge shaming. I'm not interested in embarrassing you. I don't want you to feel bad because at the end of the day, I need you to come back to the table. I know you're going to put your foot in your mouth. I know you're going to make mistakes. So this creates an environment where you are allowed to make those mistakes if you are willing to be corrected. Now, if you're not willing to be corrected, absolutely, I can handle you real quick, but that's not the type of person I am. That's not the type of person I want to be. And for me personally, at the end of the day, I want to go to bed knowing that I did my best. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do to somebody is to not say something. But if we are in an education space where you are choosing to be here and you want to learn, then okay, let's do it. You know, I can gently steer you and guide you and offer you tools and then tell you you are and like just kind of take the mystery out of it. You're gonna make a mistake, right? Also, I live in Seattle. There's about 13 Black people out here. So I know you don't have a lot of interactions and engagements with Black people either. So taking all that information in, it allows me to use my natural, I guess, personality to create an environment that allows people to want to learn, which is why I always say, you know, your lightsaber is your tool of curiosity. Use it, wield it, you know. Sometimes you have to cut things down. Sometimes your lightsaber is for protection, but a lot of times your lightsaber gives you kind of an extra tool to be able to go out and be brave, right? At any given time when you started a job, you didn't know a bunch of things. You stumbled, you made mistakes, and then you figured out the system the more you learned. History is pretty much like that. So I try to find examples of what folks may be more familiar with and then apply that to the way that I teach. And also, I just like telling stories, you know? You can always disarm somebody with a really good story.
Yeah, very true. A current story that is on my mind has to do with Google and recently settling a lawsuit brought by a whole host of Black employees who felt that they were being discriminated against and had examples, had receipts, as they say today. And Google chose to settle for to the tune of $50 million or more. And it's not even yet decided who all these people are. People can still come forward if they felt they've been wrong, but I could just hear in the back of my head all these people saying, "Oh, these people they complain about stuff and they talk so much that the company feels shamed into settling." And Google said as much. We don't think we did anything wrong, but we're going to settle because we want to move forward. Blah blah blah. Your thoughts?
Oof. Um, that does not surprise me at all. I think we are in a state. So there's an interesting kind of phrase going around on social media, depending on what side of social media you're on, and they're calling it Black fatigue, which essentially is a lot of biased white folks saying that they're tired of hearing about Black people's issues, quote unquote. The funny thing for me is how Google is losing money not just because of the settlement, but because of the lack of diversity that they willingly are participating in. There's an economist named Heather McGhee, and she wrote a book that talks about what she coined as the drained pool theory. And she uses the example of public pools that were around in the 30s, 40s, and 50s that were everywhere, right? There were community spaces, barbecues, birthday parties, community events, whatever were held in these spaces. Then when you started the fight for integration with the civil rights, with the modern civil rights movement, I should say, all of a sudden now, rather than integrating the pool, you shut the pool down. So now nobody gets to go to the community pools. Then you start to see a rise in pools in people's backyards, right? So rather than expanding community, you shut community down. And what's fascinating about that is as we are entering this kind of next phase of political nonsense, you're noticing a lot of white folks say they don't know how to build community. They don't know how to be in community. It's like, well, you destroyed community for the sake of segregation. So when you think about what Google is doing as far as AI or whatever the case may be, you get more robust results when you include more people, which means then the people that see themselves in those Google engineers or whatever want to use your product. Because a lot of times black folks will vet something for each other. Like, hey, have you tried such and such? Like for me, all me and all my friends go to the same medical professionals because somebody went to one person and was like, "Oh yeah, I like her. Like you guys should all go to her." We went to the same eye doctor. We go to the same dentist, right? Because you feel safe. Those people are all diverse. And I think the difficulty is people looking at the pie as a finite thing and not that the pie grows the more people we add to it. This idea of America being the melting pot, the wood that fuels the fire of the melting pot is the hard work of black and brown people. But the people who get to eat the soup are white folks. So this doesn't really surprise me. I think what is going to be interesting is how black engineers respond because now we're starting to see more black folks create their own businesses and not be interested in building community with white folks, which then immediately reminds me of Tulsa, right? When you're thinking about black towns, a lot of the reasons why black towns exist is because white folks were like, we don't want to be around you. So black people are like, okay, cool, we'll go do our own thing over here. You have Tulsa, Rosewood, Seneca Village that was in New York, all these black towns that then were destroyed because white people were like, wait a minute, what do you mean we can't come in there? What do you mean we can't engage, right? Money passed hands 13 times within the black community in Tulsa before it even left and went to the white community. So I think there's something fascinating about Google shooting itself in the foot with this, because if you had just been like, okay, let's just add more chairs to the table, you would be making more money and you wouldn't have to spend 50 plus million to resolve something that would have made you richer anyway. So it's like if it's your bottom line, diversify literally for your bottom line. You will get more money with more diversity. But if you don't, that's fine. That's your business. And I think that what we're seeing right now is a lot of black people, particularly black women and activists, being like, yeah, for the next 4 years, I'm cool. Because black people and brown people, we know how to survive in oppression. We know how to survive in really harsh, unimaginable conditions and still find joy. And so I think people assume that our oppression is something that we find joy in. It's like, no, we find joy in spite of the oppression. Like you can't get me down. So I'm proud of of the engineers and folks of Google, but also I'm not surprised at all. It's just Google throwing money away at the end of the day.
Thank you for that.
Of course.
What haven't we talked about in this first third of the podcast that you think is important that people ought to hear from AJ Musewe?
Ooh, I'll say I'll honor my mom with this one. So I was raised by a high achieving type A, couldn't have a better kid if you wanted type of parent. And she is very structured. She has boxes and places for everything. And then she gave birth to a wild child. Okay. I don't do anything by rules, code, nothing. But my mom understood that I needed a certain level of freedom to kind of tame my wild, reckless passion for learning and everything else that I do. And so she gave me three simple rules, right? The first rule is try and live a life of purpose. She would tell me all the time, I didn't bring you into this world to take. You need to leave these spaces better than you found them. The second one was do the right thing, especially when no one is watching. If you're doing it just for the sake of others watching you, you're not doing it for the right reason. And the third one is be kind. And whatever you do, you don't know what somebody else is dealing with unless they tell you. And so the best thing that you can do for you and for the other person is just to be kind. And I think that is the way that I try to live my life. Anything that I need to engage with or deal with falls somewhere within those three rules. So those are the three things I would offer folks as they're navigating. And also to say it's okay to make mistakes, right? Mistakes are a part of life. My mom has told me many times that she doesn't care how many mistakes I make. She only gets mad at me when I make the same mistake over and over because it means I'm not learning a lesson from that. But I would say, yeah, that's my mom's philosophy, but I've pretty much adopted it as my philosophy because it's led to me having, a happy and fulfilling life.
Wonderful. AJ, as you know, there are three parts to the Stay Free Forever podcast. The second part has me share some coursework from a student who has taken one of my cog behavioral courses and that I find interesting or compelling. Share it and we talk about it. Fair enough?
Awesome. Yep.
All right. This piece is from a Native American woman in her 30s who was a recent podcast guest. She's done two courses for me, anger management and domestic violence. Um, and this short three-paragraph answer says volumes that I think goes into all sorts of other areas of life. I'd like your thoughts on it.
Sure.
The question is, how are you scripted?
Mm.
She writes, I was scripted or programmed for the traditions of my language and culture, learning at a young age that the male is dominant in my culture and language has shaped my adulthood. Although I am also learning that a woman in my language and culture also has an unspoken power. A female has the power to say, quote unquote, enough, and she is able to walk away from what is not good for her, and the people in her tribe will accept and protect her from what is causing her harm. What I did was physically show I had had enough, partially due to me still having no respect for the victim at the time of the incident. What I saw was a male who did not have any respect for my children or myself. The only way to stop it was to physically stop it because verbally saying enough was not powerful enough to stop it. I forgot how to use my language and culture protocols due to the fact that there was a male inside the home, but he was not protecting or providing for the home he wanted and created. He was, in fact, damaging and being harmful. The male is dominant and the female is submissive. I grew up in a home that was in decay, so I thought it was normal behavior. I wasn't taught differently, so I didn't know different. Now I'm learning that I can use my protocol verbally, and I don't have to subject my children and myself to harmful people and environments due to the male wanting to be or claiming he is a protector and provider.
Mm. Wow. The first thing that comes to mind is I'm really impressed with her accountability. Um, I think when someone hurts us, I think of that phrase hurt people,
Yeah.
which is why it's really important for me personally to deal with all of my big feelings, as I like to call them. My mom and I have survived domestic violence, and so that also was a big thing that sat with me. We left California about 4 years after we got to the States, and moved up to Seattle because my mom's ex-husband was extremely abusive. I don't have any memory between the ages of 9 and 11. I don't know what happened during that period of time. I can tell something happened just because of the way I respond to certain things. I don't like people behind me. I don't like people kind of sneaking up on me, and things of that nature. What I do also think of is there's children involved, right? My mom, once she understood how bad things were, figured out the system again with very little knowledge or help and got us out. And from then on, her number one priority was making sure I had a stable life. And for all intents and purposes, I mean, I'm pretty well put together for somebody who had to navigate adult things at a very young age. Did I grow up really fast? Yes, I did. And also, my mom has never spoken an ill word about that man, even though she has every reason to. I I feel for women who are in social situations that do not give them the tools and power and support to know that that should never have happened to you and that your childhood should have never been like that. I think we underestimate how much those moments really affect a child and how they carry those things into their adulthood. And so if you don't have something that interrupts that kind of cycle and you have an ability to pause, whether it's through therapy or whatever the case may be, and understand like, wow, I was a kid, there's only so much I could have done, but now that I'm an adult and I have agency, what am I going to do to either break that cycle for the kids that are in my life or just even for yourself? It's I have a difficult relationship with forgiveness. That's one of those never-ending conversations my mom and I have. And even my friends and I think forgiveness and the church has been weaponized a lot. So my definition of forgiveness is change in behavior, right? Regardless of whether that person says I forgive you or not, the behavior that I exhibited was harmful, and I don't want anyone in my space to feel that. So for me, quote unquote, earning forgiveness is about me changing my behavior. And if that person accepts me back into their life, great, but they don't owe me anything because I caused the hurt. I really hope that this lady has found peace. I hope that she also gives herself some grace, because at the time you were doing the best that you could. And now, which is why accountability is the thing that kind of popped up. Now that you know better, you're doing better. And that's the best that you can do. And there are times you'll stumble. And again, that's okay as long as you get up and you're not taking a step back. Sometimes it's okay to just put your feet together and pause, take a moment, catch your breath, and then move forward. But all my love to this lady. Wow, what a heavy thing to survive and also to have children. So I hope for the sake of her and her children that she is giving herself moments of peace and being proud of the little steps that she takes. Every step forward is something to be proud of. So, wow. Oh, I want to give her a hug.
I'm sure she'd appreciate hearing that. And as a result of being on the podcast, she's a very shy person, but she accepted a couple of invitations to speak publicly by the people who are focusing on the Missing Indigenous People, Missing Indigenous Women's program. That because, well, let me back up. If I'm honest with myself, AJ, one of the reasons I think I wanted to have you on the podcast is because you're light years ahead of the curve that is now being faced by the Native American people in this country. Because I live minutes from a huge Native American reservation, and I work daily with people who are in that reservation, justice involved, trying to get the scratch together to pay for a course that they've been court ordered to do. Um, and when my wife and I go to a certain grocery store, we drive across that reservation and we see homes that are completely littered with vehicles and junk and these falling down trailers, and people live there. And it's easy to cluck and say, "Oh my, if they would just clean up, you know." But they've got some generational trauma going on for them that they have yet to address. There have been flurries, such as with Alcatraz and the AIM movement, but they're way behind the way Black people have claimed their space. And
Mm,
I think that your experience, your insight might just have some value for people who are wondering, yeah, but what can I do? There's so much
mm,
alcoholism, there's so much drug abuse, there's so much abuse by the authorities, there's so much keeping us down. What hope do I have?
mm. Oof. Yeah.
Not to lay that all in your feet, but I
No, no,
just
no,
think
no.
your insights would be welcome.
I personally, I like those kind of big questions. I would say that hope is one of the most powerful things that you can have, right? In a way, hope is like the force. Again, coming back to Star Wars, hope is like the force, right? And the more you believe in the force, the stronger you get in it, right? For example, Yoda fully believes in the force to the point that he's almost made up all of midichlorians, but we can talk about that a different time. And so the diminishing of hope is systemic, it's purposeful, right? When you are looking around and you see desolation, it's very difficult for you to keep that fire going. And so, my, I guess, offer in this is one step at a time. Start with your home, start with what is happening inside your home. When your home is peaceful, right? And you're able to think, you're able to plan, you're able to dream in your home, that is where it starts, right? It starts in the home, which sometimes can seem like a pretty simple response, but it really does. It starts with having honest conversations about what is going on in your home, right? If your kid, believe your kids also. Create relationships where your children come to you first, not when they're, happy, but also when they're in trouble, right? You want the census to be like, oh man, I need to call my mom, not, oh man, I gotta call my mom, right? Those little bits create children who then go out and change the world. My mom is a conservative traditionalist, right? And she has the most untraditional, unconventional child. By Luo standards, I am supposed to be the one to be the next generation, right? So, for example, my mom being the firstborn, even though I'm not the firstborn of the cousins, because of who my mother is, I am the first cousin, right? So when our cousins are dealing with stuff, when there's, trice, whatever's going on, it's my job to then go in there and be like, all right, y'all, look, cut this mess out. Especially because our parents, my mom and her siblings fight all the time. And so we're like, hey, look, this ain't got nothing to do with us. Y'all deal with it. The cousins are going to be over here. But we have the ability to do that because my mom, my grandfather, my great grandfather, my grandma created a space for us to be able to take care of ourselves, to be able to account for ourselves. And also, we understand the heaviness of legacy, right? We know what our lineage is. Indigenous people in this country have some of the most in-depth cultural customs and leaders, right, that we have ever seen. Whether you're looking at the Western expansion of this country and what they had to deal with Andrew Jackson in the 1830s, to the way that this country is trying to erase Indigenous people, and yet you're still here. That level of you can't take us out is at the core of your hope, right? Black folks have been subjugated to some of the most horrific conditions, and yet you still see us laughing and joyful. Lean into your traditions, lean into your cultures, sit at the feet of your elders and learn how they survived. Take the pieces that you can and instill them in yourself. But at the very, very beginning of it, it starts in the home. If your home is your safe space, it's amazing what you are able to do outside of your home. Instill that love in the children, and they will be the ones to change the trajectory of what is possible. So that's what I would say, and I think that's what people see with the Black community, right? When all hell is breaking loose and Black people are doing line dances, it's because the community is home. We take care of each other, but also accountability. I think our elders have a difficult time with accountability because they weren't given the therapy tools, right? I have language that I know my mother does not have because my mom did not grow up in an environment where therapy was seen as an assistance. Therapy was seen as, oh, that's white people stuff. Like, we don't do that kind of thing. But now my mom has a therapist in the school that she built in Kenya, in the rural village. Like, we have a therapist, which is like bananas to see. But because my mom is willing to hear me out, because my mom believes and trusts my opinion, because she knows who she raised, I don't feel like I can't come to my mom and be like, hey, so you know how you were talking to that staff member? Yeah, I would tone it down a little bit, because you want people to not be afraid of you. And my mom always says, like, I don't have a monopoly of language or knowledge. So let's work together. But I would say it starts in the home. Once your home is taken care of, it's amazing what your children will be able to do beyond your own wildest dreams. So to the indigenous community, I would say lean into your traditions, lean into your elders, lean into each other, and then you will see, even more flourish. But the system is working against you. And so hope becomes the fuel, hope becomes your gasoline, hope becomes the fan that, ignites the flame. And so hold on to that.
The only question that remains is just how old a soul are you?
Well, I do have cataracts, so if eyes are window to the soul, I'm getting up there in age. I'm getting up there in age.
Wow, thank you for that.
Of course.
Uh, as you know, there are three parts to the Stay Free Forever podcast, and the third part would have each of us share a passage or a quote that we find meaningful and talk about it. Who would you like to go first?
Mm. You go first.
Okay. Uh, I'm going to go counter to one of your trends and share a quote that's not as well known from the I Have a Dream speech of Martin Luther King, but
Mm.
one that I think has great relevance today, and we can talk about that whether it does or not. This is from Martin Luther King on that day in August 28th, 1963, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in front of 250,000 plus people, when he said, When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds.
Mm. I really love that quote because right after is when Mahalia Jackson yelled to Martin and said, "Tell him about the dream," and that's when he shifted his speech. But that's it's
I love
that's
background.
Oh yeah, yeah. He had given that speech prior, a few days prior to that, and he had called Mahalia Jackson, who is one of the queens of gospel music and one
Mhm.
of his really good friends, and he was like, "Mahalia, girl, like I'm going through it." And so he had given another speech about a dream, and that I have a dream actually comes from Prathia Hall. She was a young lady that he had seen speak a couple months prior who was part of SNCC, and then he asked her if he could borrow that phrase, "I have a dream." So I love that quote. My quote is from Zora Neale Hurston. And if you have not heard of Ms. Zora Neale Hurston, I highly encourage folks to read. She was an anthropologist who collected Black folklore and folk tales in various parts of the American South. Actually, I was just in Mobile, Alabama, where the last human cargo ship, the Clotilda, was found, and I got to see pieces of the ship. And one of the people that Zora Neale interviewed was a man named Cujo Lewis, who was on that last ship, and it's in her book Barracoon. So, but she has this quote where she says, "Sometimes I feel discriminated against, but it does not make me angry. It merely astonishes me. How can anyone deny themselves the pleasure of my company? It's beyond me." I love that quote.
Tell me why.
Because racism is stupid. Like, at the end of the day, racism makes no sense whatsoever. There's so much about other cultures that are fascinating and beautiful and enrich life. So it's like, why deny yourself a bunch of seasoning in your life? You know, I think of how Columbus went sailing around the world for spices, but then all of a sudden now the queen doesn't want to use spices in her food because it's accessible to everybody. That's stupid. That's so dumb. I know I am a hoot, okay? I am charming, adorable, full of anecdotes and lessons. Why wouldn't you want to be around me? Because I have melanin? Because I so happen to be born on the equator, and that's the biggest difference? That's dumb. That is just dumb. So it's astonishing how hard fought segregation is. And I mean, right now it's more administrative, but still, like all of these removal of resources simply because you think that you were the chosen one. I need y'all to remember Jesus was brown, okay? So again, it's just it makes no sense. It's dumb. So I think Zora encapsulates the kind of foolishness of it because the black culture then is emulated by people. So how are you gonna tell me that you hate me, but then you're gonna go and rap my music? Okay. So it allows me to not dwell on any racist experiences that I encounter again in Seattle because at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, you're just dumb. Oh, okay. Let me go about my business. And it doesn't stick with me. There are obviously going to be moments that are hurtful, right? But for the most part, I love myself so much and the people around me that you can't shake that. And so it is. It's astonishing. And I think that's just like the sociological brain I have. But yeah, I love that quote.
Yeah, that's a very good quote. And it reminds me of the people who have low self-esteem. So many, and it's
Mm,
ingrained in particularly in, I would say, in women in society. There was a documentary done once decades ago about how often women say "I'm sorry" in
mm,
life.
mm,
They put cameras in grocery stores, for example, and two people would come around a corner with their carts, and whenever it was a man and a woman, the woman would always say, "I'm sorry," and scoot around. And and I catch students of mine doing this all the time. They'll say, "I'm sorry." I'm saying, you have no reason to apologize to me. We simply had a miscommunication about scheduling or whatever it is. You need to hold on to your power a little bit, and don't, instead of saying, "I'm sorry I'm late," say, "Thank you for your patience." Something like that. Just turn the narrative a little bit. And I find that comes out of your quote as well.
Absolutely. I think perspective is really important in the way that we navigate the world. You can keep yourself in these kind of negative situations that then have an effect on your mental health, or you can shift your perspective. I tend to do that a lot when I'm engaging with folks who may be rude, especially let's say like service folk who are in the service industry. I can imagine how stressful it is because the service industry, you're not well paid, your hours are probably super crappy, you may have kids, you may have school. And so one rude interaction, unless you're calling me out my name and calling me, whatever, but if it's just like, oh, you're maybe a little short or maybe a little snippy, I can pause and say, wow, that person could be going through a lot. So let me chill. But I do agree with you that women are put in a position where we have to be more, I don't know, accepting of like crappy behavior. And yet that's not the way I was raised. Cause look, my mom don't play that. She she doesn't. And because of how patriarchal our tribe is, my mom has gone completely against the grain. And again, that's why I say it starts in the home. When your child sees that, right? I can remember being maybe 19, 20. And in our tradition, when an elder walks in the room, everybody stands up, right? We even have a specific way in which you shake an elder's hand. You put your right hand out and then you hold your right hand with your left, right? That it takes two of my hands to shake one of yours. When I was about 19, we walked into a community meeting and the elder stood up for my mom when she walked in. And I can remember the just like, even now I get chills because I understand culturally what that means for my mom to be the one to receive that type of respect. Now she was just like, y'all can sit down. Like, please sit down. Because my grandfather was still alive at the time. But even my grandfather stood up, right? My grandfather was my biggest champion. I miss him desperately because I wonder what he would think of me now. But also, my grandfather was not about making me cower, right? He believed in my decisions, he supported my decisions, and he created an environment where all of his grandkids, especially his granddaughters, could stand tall and know that one of the most important people in our village, in our community, had our backs regardless of gender. So yeah, I think it does start in the home, but you also have to want it for yourself. And that means being braver. It means being okay being as seen as like the villain because you know you're not the villain. And so a lot of it is a sense of self. I know who I am. So if somebody was to say something about me that I know is not true, it's like, all right, cool, because my people know what's true and what's not. And also that gives you a sense of freedom from trying to conform, right? My mom had to travel a lot for work, so I was left to my own devices a lot. And I never really worried about somebody getting back to my mom about what I was doing because whatever I was doing is something I would tell her I was doing. So you can't snitch on me and be like, oh my God, Lois, I saw Audrey doing such and such. And my mom was asking me about it. I was like, yes, I was doing such and such. Like, because I know who I am. So humility can be a hindrance, but it depends on how you engage with humility, you know? And if you're a badass, you're a badass. Be the badass that you are because you don't know who's watching you and how you can influence somebody just by being your full self. And if there's parts about you that you don't like, you know, change your perspective on them. What lesson do I need to learn, through this behavior that I'm exhibiting? What harm or what hurt or what unresolved feeling do I have that I need to like navigate and tackle that? And then once you do, you're like, oh, okay, cool. That's one less rock in my backpack. And then you get a little lighter. You walk with a little more of a pep in your step. It's like the Reading Rainbow song. You just hear butterflies in the sky all the time. So, yeah, I feel for the folks who are in that position of the low self-esteem, but also there's nowhere to go but up. And so, what kind of adventure do you want to have as you grow your self-esteem? Do you want to be Anakin Skywalker or you want to be Darth Vader? There's two sides to every coin.
Sure, sure. As we wind this up, I want to frog back to my quote because I happen to know that you are a card-carrying constitutionalist, meaning you carry a copy of
Oh,
the Constitution with you. My quote did have to do with what the Constitution guarantees us, but we're in uncharted waters these days, in my opinion, because the very Constitution is being ignored. It's being swept aside, and if not addressed by those of us who serve to will be affected by this insidious change, then it'll be too late. So right now, people can be arrested and deported to a prison without due process. Right now, the president can take gifts and do business and have donations in the billions from people without a peep from the legislature, from the Congress, um, and too many other examples to mention. Um, is your faith still in the Constitution? And if so, or why not?
Ooh, it depends on the day. I
Yeah.
would say, personally, the three amendments that I tend to pay the most attention to is the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. The 14th Amendment really is the one on birthright citizenship that everybody's kind of talking about right now, and those were passed during the Reconstruction age. The thing that is most fascinating about those three amendments is they were passed within 5 years, which is nuts if you're thinking about American politics to pass three amendments that are so sweeping and so life-changing in the span of 5 years, right after Abraham Lincoln is assassinated. And then we got to deal with Andrew Johnson, who, Lord have mercy, Andrew Johnson was a horrible president. But the thing that gives me faith in yeah, no, I don't really have a lot of faith in politics. I'm not gonna lie. I have faith in community members. I have faith in the ones who are doing the work to hold politicians accountable. I think that we have now moved past the kind of threshold that a lot of Black organizers and brown organizers and activists were telling us was coming. For example, forced sterilizations have been around, really kind of kicked off with the Buck v. Bell case in 1927 during the height of the eugenics movement. After that, forced sterilizations were happening left, right, and center, but they were happening to marginalized communities. And so a lot of white women were like, oh, that doesn't bother us. It doesn't affect us. Then we had Roe and a lot of Black organizers and brown organizers like, hey, you guys, we need to work together to codify this into law. And they were like, no, it's no problem. As soon as Roe was repealed, the white voices were like, oh my God, you guys, we have to come together to like make this thing because it affects all of us. And it's like, oh, it affects all of us now because you're getting touched by this thing, which reminds me of the drain pool theory. We have had many moments in this country where we had opportunities to kind of stop this from happening, and we did not take those opportunities. I would recommend a podcast by Rachel Maddow called Ultra. It's 2 seasons, and it talks about the kind of white nationalist movement that took place in the 1930s, 1940s, and we had an opportunity to stop them, and we did not. There's a famous picture of the brown shirts at Madison Square Garden, all throwing up Nazi hand signs. Then you get into Watergate, which is one of my personal favorite things to talk about is Watergate. You
Hmm.
get into Watergate. We could have handled that situation in a way that would have prevented more tomfoolery, but we did not. Right around after that, you get the Iran-Contra affair, right? So it's like there's all these moments in time where politicians could have done the right thing and chose not to. So there's a lot of us who have been on the front lines of organizing and political activism that are like, we knew this was coming. And that was why Black folks, especially Black women, are turning into each other. Like we're turning into ourselves because we know what's coming. We have seen it happen to our grandparents. We've seen it happen to our elders, those who came before us. It brings me a lot of pain that Bob has done so much work during the civil rights movement in the 50s, 60s, 70s for him to be right back to where he was, right? Now Bob is getting ready to leave the country. He's like, I'm tired. And it is the education system also that has prevented us from really understanding how bad things are. So then when you become an adult, it like smacks you in the face. So with that being said, yes, I still believe it's important for folks to vote. I still believe it's important for folks to attend city halls and advocate for not just your own people, but for everyone, because no matter what, it's going to touch you. It's going to touch you, right? When they're removing health clinics in rural areas, it's not just to punish the Black folks, it's to punish the poor folks. If you're thinking about why MLK was, assassinated, he started talking about economic stability rather than just integration, right? He has that famous line where he says, I fear I led my people into a burning building. I mean, he did, right? If you're looking at the Brown v. Board of Education case and you listen to the interviews by Linda Brown's mom, she said that we did not want necessarily to integrate. We wanted to have the choice to send our kids to the schools that we wanted to send them to. That's what they wanted. But then the federal government was like, no, we should just integrate. So then a bunch of Black teachers lost their jobs, right? And then we start having these white teachers teaching, treating these Black students as though they're inferior, even though those Black students were just as smart. And the domino effect starts. there's always a reason as to why we are in the space that we're in. I think that's why I love history, because it's like, oh, these are the touchstones where we could have made changes. So what lessons can we learn from that? I think there's a certain level of humility that white folks in general need to have to understand that the reason we are in this space is because of the way that your ancestors handled this country. And it's not to say that you were enslaver or whatever, but you are also at a loss for resources and community because of the position that we have been put in where we're pitted against each other. And so at this point, I think the folks who are not familiar with the demographics that you and I engage with on a daily basis are in for a really, really difficult time because they've never had to deal with this before. And they can see themselves from a selfish light of like, well, if you have this, why don't I have this type of thing? But the whole, oh, I'm tired of hearing about Black people's struggles with Google, right? Just to like tie all of our conversations together.
Yes.
It is about figuring out what is best for the whole, right? And I love the Three Musketeers quote, one for all and all for one. That's really what it has to be. And ego has to be removed from that. And I think that is something that we are not going to be able to see in quite some time. So I'm hunkering down at the end of it. I'm hunkering down. I'm lucky to live in a liberal city like Seattle. And also I have to deal with covert racism and microaggressions and stuff. So it's like you got to pick the lesser of two evils, which is what we literally have been saying since the beginning of politics. So this is exactly where I thought America would be just based off of the history that I've learned, but also I have created a community around myself in which we understand how to take care of each other. And our community is wide and diverse and rich. And we're taking care of the kids because that's what we have to do. We have to fortify them for the life of adulthood that they're gonna engage in. But as far as politics, I'm not surprised. I highly recommend folks going and checking out that podcast. There's also another really good podcast called Slow Burn by Slate, and it has a plethora. I think there's like 10 seasons. It has a plethora of different topics that help explain kind of what American politics and history is doing and how we got to where we are. Educate yourself, figure out what medium you enjoy learning in the most and then dive deep. I am getting ready to start a book club based off of comic books. We're going to learn history through comics because that's what I love comic books. So find your interests and then figure out what is the historical context for the things that you enjoy. And you will figure out a way to advocate for yourself and your community that feels good to you. But yeah, I don't really have a lot of faith you are absolutely correct. I do have a pocket constitution. I appreciate that you that you spotted me that well. I do have a pocket constitution with me a lot of times.
Sure, sure. I'd like to just say, get your reaction. I'm personally really angry with two people, a man and a woman, who have tremendous platforms and who are, in my opinion, are failing to use them, neglecting to use them. And that would be Barack Obama and
Hmm.
Kamala Harris.
Hmm.
With the atrocities going on at the level of government which he once led and which she once led and was almost this close to leading, they are, in my opinion, they are squandering a huge opportunity to give voice to what so many of us are feeling, is that we're going to lose our freedom. We're going to lose our democracy for apathy. And their apathy and not speaking up really pisses me off.
Hmm. So what we this is reminding me of the W.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, talented 10th situation, right? At the end of the day, we cannot expect the rich to save us all, right? Yes, Barack Obama is the first Black president. Two, he's Luo, actually. His step grandma doesn't live too far from my grandma. And yet you don't hear a bunch of Kenyans claiming him, right? Like
Mhm.
Kenyans are like, yeah, it's great. I think more for the ego of the fact that we are Kenyans, and of course the first American president would be Kenyan is like that's about as far as it goes. Kamala is a product of the system. Hakeem Jeffries is another one that I'm really, really disappointed in. Cory Booker, I'm disappointed in. But this is where we kind of fail in looking at the whole person, right? Martin Luther King was amazing, and also Martin Luther King was an asshole. Like at the end of the day, right? He
Mhm.
was
Yeah.
excellent, was able to bring people together, but he was misogynistic. And if we don't look at the whole person, then we are denying ourselves or we're putting faith in something that is not attainable. We need to manage our expectations. I've been disappointed with Obama since his second presidency or his second term. Kamala, I've been disappointed in her since she, was trying to do truancy stuff in Oakland. Like, there's so many things that you have to then decide, okay, is this for the greater good? or is it not? And I think the further you get away from the community organizing, from being boots on the ground, the harder it is for you to actually understand what the community and what the people want you to do. Barack knows what is happening in the country. Like he knows. And also because of the etiquette of politics, there's certain things that he can or cannot say out of respect or out of, not whatever. And it's like, all right, dude, but if this country goes down, you guys got millions. You got a house in Hawaii. You got multiple houses in the continental US. You will be fine. They're literally building your presidential library right now and like
Yeah.
up in construction time, right? I think Michelle is more likely to speak out because, as the first lady, she's like, look, I ain't got time for all this. I'm not running for president. But I also think this is one of the things that I wonder if people are waiting for Black people to save the country, right? Because there's also a lot of white folks that could be speaking up. AOC, I'm really disappointed in her. Like there's so
Really?
much more
But
that I
she's traveling the country with Bernie. She's putting on boots on the ground. She's drawing big crowds. I see her as one of the bright spots.
I understand that, and I think because she was a community organizer, I think we wanted more from her earlier. It shouldn't have gotten to this point for her to then be like, okay, y'all, let's really start making some noise.
Yeah.
Yes, she's been excellent. She's been a rabble rouser, and there's also some times where she had to bend to the will of the system, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it inherently difficult when you don't understand politics. You don't understand the inner workings because they purposely keep us from understanding. So when you're then trying to figure out what's going on, you're like, this is too much. It's overwhelming. I'm just not going to deal with it. And you check out. I think that's our biggest issue right now is we
Hmm.
have created life to be so difficult that folks are trying to feed their kids and don't have time to be paying attention to what Congress is doing. So then they're passing these laws in the middle of the night and you wake up and all of a sudden you don't have health care,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We're seeing what's happening with the farmers right now. A bunch of them voted for, 47, and
Hmm.
now you realize that USID was your biggest customer, and you're like, what in the world is going on? But when the black farmers had their land taken away, and they were asking you all to come and be in partnership because this could happen to you, you didn't care. Because again, racism is stupid,
Yeah.
right? So I think we have to give up the idea of the perfect politician. I think we also have to give up the idea that politics is going to save us. It's community organizing that's going to save us, or at least give us a moment to pause so that the tidal wave doesn't wash over us and destroy everything. But people don't put enough faith in community organizing. They think it's BS. My partner was one of the people who helped organize the removal of the Confederate monuments in Richmond, right? Like she's boots on the ground and her people are tired. If the front line is tired and the front line breaks, we have no hope. And right now it is hanging on by a thread.
Yeah.
And so for me, I love teaching in this environment because I need people to understand how dire it is, and I also need people to understand how much power you have as an individual to create change. And again, it starts in the home. If you talk to your children about what's going on in a way that's appropriate, and you create children who are more empathetic, who are not going out and calling their friends the N word and then getting suspended and be like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. You know what that word means. And
Yeah.
if the parent is not also being like, damn, what did I do to raise my kid to make them think that it is okay for them to behave like this? Because that kid is going to become an adult. That's what I don't think we understand. Like this child, the way you are rearing them, they're going to be an adult. I was at the Smithsonian African American Museum maybe 2020, right before everything shut down for COVID. And there was a group of kids in all MAGA attire laughing at a picture of a black man being lynched while their chaperones stand right there, right? And so if we are not paying attention to the way that we're talking about issues in front of our kids, like my nieces and nephews know what's going on. They know auntie's a historian. They know if their teacher says something that auntie said, that's not real, hand goes up. Allow your children to question because they inherently understand that racism is unfair, right? What do you mean I can't sit with my friend and in 1960 because they're black and I'm white? That doesn't make sense. But somewhere in their rearing, they then become the racist. They then become George Wallace, They then are sitting there saying segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. But at some point, that child did not understand race. So we are in a position where the black elders who have been telling us that this is coming are now like, okay, cool. I'm reaching the end of my life. I'm about to go and become an ancestor. This is y'all's problem now. So understand why there are people who are so fatigued that they can't pay attention to politics. You have to care about your community. You have to be okay not being the center of attention. Because again, are you doing this for you? Or are you doing this for us? But we're at the 250 mark where they say empires fall. So I guess we're Rome now, is really what it comes down to. And I'm lucky enough to have dual citizenship, so I can go back to Kenya, but Kenya's corrupt too. I mean, we're throwing shoes at our president. So it's like there's nowhere to be safe. So I'd rather my home be the safest place that I can have and then create my community around it. My partner and I, we, try to create dinners for Black women to come to the house. I'll cook. You just get a place to be where there's no expectations. People understand what you're feeling with just a look because I need to fortify the Black women in my life because it is going to be difficult when you get out into the world, whether it's corporate or you're an entrepreneur or whatever. There's an expectation for Black women to heal because we are the ones that tend to take care of the community. But now, what are you going to do when that's been taken out, right? Regardless of what time period. I remember somebody sending me an article about how women had to go back to the workforce. And I said, you mean white women, right? Because Black women were never out of the workforce. And the reason why, we're seeing a lot
Good
of
point.
I mean, I'm just saying, like Black women were, there's literally laws passed that said Black women had to be working. And who were the people who were raising those children? It was Black women. It was the Black nannies that were raising the children. Then you remove the Black women from the household, and now you got a bunch of asshole kids running around who are now asshole adults. There's always a connection. We are so intertwined in the way in which we function in the world that when you are not in tuned to that connection, you sever it. It becomes like Marvel's timeline with all these different ways in which you can go rather than us having just one big, continuity. And it's like you're just really shooting yourself in the foot simply because of the color of somebody's skin and you don't want to share. And that's fine. Go be weird over there. Get out of my way and let me save and serve my community. You can either be about it or you're not. And Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, before his passing, he had a quote that was attributed to him where he said, "There's many ways to get to the North Star. You just got to figure out what your path is, but don't block somebody else's path." Like, why do you get to care about more? Why do you get to care more about your child than my mom cares about me? My mom wants me to come home safe too. And now, because of the way that politics is, my mom is more afraid for me now than she ever was before because of what my job is, because of what I'm saying. And it's like, okay, well, whenever somebody asks, like, if you were alive during the civil rights movement, what would you be doing? Me, this, now. I am Highlander Folk School. I am going and teaching people, giving you the tools, but you have to want to engage. You don't need to, I don't need to, I'm not going to placate you. I'm not here to pat your back when you tell me, oh my God, this one time I was racist. Okay, and what are you doing about it now? I'm not going to pat your back and give you a cookie because you said that you had a Black friend in sixth grade named Jamal. Where's Jamal now? Do you even know what he's doing? You don't need to create false relationships with Black people. Change the way that you do your everyday things. Get a dentist or a medical provider who's a person of color so that at least you have some sort of interaction. Build that comfort. Know you are going to mess up because if you are not in community with people of color, then you are going to be awkward. That's okay. Learn how to ask questions, right? Say, hey, I was reading this book. I came across this, term, phrase, whatever. It's unfamiliar to me because I am not in the Black community. If you have capacity, I would love to talk to you about it. Or could you recommend someone that would be happy to talk to me about it? And if that Black person's like, no, I don't want to, just be like, okay, cool, great. And then go about your business because we are not here to serve you. And people are really about to feel the vacuum of Black women. And that makes me sad for a lot of folks who don't have Black women in their life because I feel lucky as a Black woman to have Black women in my life because I know I'm going to be okay. The energy that I put into them is the exact same energy that they put into me. So I'm fine. I think that's why I am not as like angry as what is going on right now because I'm always angry. Word to Bruce Banner and the Hulk. I'm always angry. But I'm okay with that because anger is a sense of protection, right? You need to learn and understand your anger. I was an angry child. I was an angry child to the point that my anger had a nickname and it was called Shadow. I am a Batman fan, so that's probably also why. But the older I got, I understood that my anger was hurt, right? I was hurt that my mom was always gone. And from 15 on, I spent 3 to 4, 5, 6 months by myself. That means I get myself up from school, I get myself ready, I go to school, I come back, do my homework, take care of the house. I have to pay the bills, right? So I was an adult by the time I was 15, but I was angry all the time. And I was like, damn, I just miss my mom. Like, I'm not old enough to understand the responsibilities that my mom has to the village, but I just miss my mom. Like, I want to go to the movies with you. I want to sit and crack jokes. My mom and I were reading Harry Potter at the same time. I think she was like a book behind. And I was like, I want to read Harry Potter with you. But the older I got, the more I understood that my mom has a bigger purpose. And how lucky am I to watch and learn by example of what one person can do for a whole village. My mom employs 700 people. That means 700 people have the ability to take care of their families. Her school now has 400 kids. A good portion of them, if not 80%, are HIV/AIDS positive and or orphans. But now they get school, they get education, they get opportunity, and it's not just an education. She takes them on trips. She ensures that their minds are expanded and they know what is possible. And this is a rural village that nobody even knows how to get to half the time. That is incredible what the community does. And she puts it back into the hands of the community. She's like, this is your school. So once a month, all the parents get together and they clean the school from top to bottom because half of those parents are the ones that built the school. They were hired as the construction workers. And this is one person, just because my great grandfather decided that he was going to educate all the children. And so my mom tells the people in the village, look at what happens when you educate a girl. So we're removing the patriarchy child by child. My cousin Chi-Chi is my twin. We're 4 months apart, and the family jokes that we have to be separated by oceans because it doesn't matter who says something to her, we're fighting. We don't need reason. We don't like that is my girl. She and I were raised by my mom essentially. Chi-Chi is getting her PhD in biostatistics. She's now running the clinic that my mom just opened. That is incredible. And also racism prevents you from being in community with those type of people. So I encourage the folks who are listening to this, whether you have been in trouble and you are now working your way to, building a life for yourself, or you're just looking for a path, direction, start with yourself. Figure out who you are, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it, and then come to terms with that. You are a plethora of colors and feelings, emotions, experiences that uniquely combine to make you. You are worth something, regardless of what your past was. You can make something of your future if you choose to do it. That's the big thing. The world doesn't owe you anything. I would love for the world to give me everything that I say I want simply because the world has been shitty to me and my mom in the past. But no, I choose what the world is going to give me because I demand it. But I have to put the work in and I have to be okay being corrected. I have to be okay knowing that sometimes I'm not going to get it right. But that's part of growth. And I want to grow into the best person I can be because the legacy that has been left to me, not just by Bob, not just by Mrs. Hamer, not just by my mom, my grandma, all of those women who are in my life, it's also for me, right? I have nieces. I want my little nugget to know that she can do anything. And there's no hindrance. There's no such thing as a glass ceiling for her. But it's not just for those folks. It's for the lady that we just talked about. How beautiful is it for her to say, "Wow, I need to be accountable for my actions, and now I want to do better for my children." She just shifted the direction that her children are going to grow into in adulthood. How beautiful is that simply by her making a choice? So I think in life, as we are entering the kind of belly of the beast as far as our next 4 political years,
Mhm.
find community. Humble yourself and find community. Put yourself in places where you have never been before. Educate yourself and be ready for a fight.
AJ Musewe, I cannot imagine a more delightful conversation that exceeded my expectations. And I hope you'll consider coming back sometime to give us an update and talk again. Yes?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.